and so on. Hi, this is Jason Bartholow. We'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. Don Gotterdam, I have unmuted you. Can you tell me, are you able to see the PCA forum slide?
Yes. Oh,
Morning, everybody, and thank you for coming to today's PCA forum. We're going to go ahead and get started. I think everybody came because there's a demo of the new Pcard application, but I also had to take advantage of the time to share a couple other things related to the Pcard program. So we'll start with those things and then get into the demo. Just as soon as I can figure out how to advance my slides. There we go. All right, so before the demo, I want to talk about a new payment card RFP, a word on Pcard logs, a new data field called the unique transaction ID, and then we'll get into the demo, and then I've got a couple of follow-up discussion questions related to the new app. So the Pcard RFP, as you're aware, or should be, we've been with U.S. Bank now for several years. The current contract was adopted back in 2012, and we've used several extensions of that contract. And most recently, we executed a new one-year extension, so the current contract will expire completely on May 31st of 2020. So we've begun the process for a new RFP for a new payment card contract, and we're actually adding a couple of services to that new RFP in addition to just the regular payment card, which we've been using for many years now. We're also adding an e-payables feature, which is basically just a way to push EFT-like payments across the credit card network to suppliers who would sign up for that service. The benefit to the state is that we collect the same payment card rebate off of those payments as we do for Pcard, but you don't have to fool with the Pcard and the back-end reconciliation and everything. So more to come on that. And just a caveat to that, we're inviting bids for that service, but we're not settled that we're going to actually use it. We just want to see what the market has to offer, and it's something that we'd have in our tool chest that we may use at some point in the future. The other additional service, and this one I'm pretty excited about, is it's called declining balance cards, and we want to use those to replace the purchase of gift cards. So there's several agencies that have a need to use gift cards for some statutory purpose. But those gift cards are really kind of dangerous, and we don't like to have people go out and exchange the state's credit for cash and put that out on the street. So these declining balance cards are effectively a payment card, and we have the same controls. We can limit the MCCs that those cards can be used for. We can keep track of the spend and the balances and everything, but instead of charging debt, essentially, we would front load those cards with a balance, say $25 for, someone that, Ohioans, or opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities. They have folks that they provide funds to so that they can help them gain employment. We would give them a card loaded with this balance, and maybe it's tied down to they can only use it at a gas station. So effectively, it serves the same purpose as a gift card, but gives us more control and gets us out of the business of going to the grocery store and buying gift cards. So those are the two things we want to add with this RFP. And then, of course, our credit card program, and we want to be able to open it up to any new industry offerings that are out there. So the status of things, the RFP has been drafted. It just came out of OBM legal review yesterday, so I'm kind of putting the finishing touches on it this week, and it'll go over to state procurement by the end of this week. From there, our plan is that the RFP will be released to the bidding community in the middle of September. We hope to have a contract in place by the end of December, which would give us the first part of next year to transition to a new bank in the event that would become necessary. And if we do have to switch banks, I think we'll need those 4 or 5 months to get everything switched over. So that's the payment card RFP. A word on Pcard logs. My staff have reported to me that through their audits, they find occasion where cardholders sometimes combine some transactions together in the log, and then we end up, when the bank sends the transactions over, they're individual swipes. We ask that you ask your cardholders to make sure that they're logging each individual swipe as opposed to ever combining things together on the log, so that we have a good way to keep track of everything, log to transaction, all the way through the process.
But we can use the log for multiple transactions, but those transactions should equal a swipe in Oaks.
Yeah, so the question is, the log can still be used for multiple transactions. And yes, you can log as many transactions as is necessary on a single log. We just want essentially each swipe of the card to be represented as a separate line on the log.
So it's not the item for the swipe, it's the swipe total, the grand total. So if you have 8 items, you don't need to list all 8 on the card. You just need to list the grand total of the $85.23.
Yes, the question is that for the full swipe or per item? And the answer is it's for the full swipe. So let's just say you go to Lowe's and you're buying supplies for 2 different projects, and so for whatever reason you do those as 2 different swipes. One's $25, the other one's $75. What we don't want to see is a single line on the log for $100 and 2 separate receipts. We'd want to see a line for $25 and a line for $75.
I think Granger you'll put a Granger order in, and they'll swipe as they fulfill the order. So you'll order $100 worth of stuff, and they'll send out 4 different orders, so it comes through as 4 different transactions.
That's out of our control. This is the main thing. Sometimes the vendor's actions out of control.
Yep. So the comment is that Granger, sometimes you submit an order and you receive that order over time. Now, are you seeing 4 different transactions for
That's what I
those.
understand, yeah.
Yeah, so as long as we log those transactions,
But we make the purchase, we buy $100 worth of whatever,
mhm,
then a week later Granger sends half the order, swipes and charges us $50, and another week later they do the other half the order and charge us $50. So we don't know it's a multiple item we ordered. It's a single order, but they can't fulfill it all at once, so they bill us twice. They're not supposed to bill till they ship.
right. So the comment is that, you know, you're logging before you know that Granger in this example is gonna send it separately.
Your new system will fix this.
Exactly, yes. For those on the phone, the comment was the new system will fix this, and that is absolutely true. So, to the extent possible, we do ask that you make sure that those things are logged separately. So a new data field that we've just recently started to receive, and I had hoped to get this information to you before it became an issue, and our friends at the Attorney General's office let me know as soon as it happened that it kind of messed with their reporting process. So I'm working with VI now to get this new data field into the PC 0001 report so that agencies can still use that data field if they need to. But this new data field is truly a unique transaction ID. So I think people have thought through the years that the reference ID that you see in Oaks is a unique value, and most of the time it is, but the bank has no control over that number, and so some merchants will use the same number for every transaction that they process in a day. And so it's not truly unique. This new value that U.S. Bank actually creates for each transaction is truly unique. And I wanted to pull it in because it helps us to tie a transaction in Oaks back to U.S. Bank exactly, so we know exactly which transaction on the bank side we're talking about. That unique transaction ID, effective last Wednesday or Thursday, I think, is being populated into a field called reference that you'll see on the reconcile statement page. So the old reference number was actually populated into two different fields in Oaks. The other one is called transaction ID, but that transaction ID isn't visible through the reconcile statement page. It just exists on the table. So we're getting both numbers, but we can only show the unique transaction ID in this reference field. And the reason it shows up there is because the reference field can hold the 29 characters, whereas the transaction field that you don't see is limited to, I think, 23 or 24 characters. Dan, can you give Shavkat the mic?
Quick question on transaction ID. I think in the past, the old systems had starting with two account, and business for the original transaction and then 7 for refund. Is it still going to be the similar layout?
Yeah, the question was, you know, the reference number was typically began with a 2 for charges and a 7 for refunds. And the question is, will that be the same in the future? No, I don't anticipate that it will be the same. I have an example of each of the numbers, and this is the field in Oaks. So on the left is the old reference number, 23 characters long. Then on the right is the new unique transaction ID, and it's 29 characters long, and from what I've seen, it always begins with a 0. And so the first part of that number is, you know, some random number, and then you've got like the date as part of it on down the way there. All right. Well, without further ado, we'll get into the app demo. Let me get switched over here just a second. All right, everybody on the webinar should be seeing the Pcard application login screen now. So this application has, oh, the webinar is seeing it, but the room is not. All right, now hopefully everyone's seeing the application. So this has been a year-long plus, I think, effort by OBMIT to put this application together. We're currently system testing it. And before we got through system testing, I wanted to demo this for agencies and get some feedback and just make sure that we don't need to make any changes before we finalize this thing. Because I really want it to be something that people are happy and excited about using, rather than something that we, put out there and force people to use. So, let me get logged in here. And this is on a test server, so sometimes it's a little bit slow.
Jason, is that your Oaks ID password, or is that a password that is unique to the site?
The question is, for the login, is it the Oaks ID and password? And the answer is yes. We will be leveraging your Oaks employee ID and Oaks password for sign-in. So you see a whole bunch of options here. Most users won't see a lot of these things, but these are all the things that are available to us on the administration side to set up and manage the app. What I want to talk about primarily today is this transactions piece of things. And so when we go to transactions, you see a number of transactions here. I want to point out that you'll see keyed, you'll see received from the bank, and I don't think it's under my login, but there's also merged, and I'll show that to you here in a couple of minutes. Oh, yep. Kathy McIntyre from OBMIT wants to make a comment.
Hi, everybody. What you're seeing here,
Kathy, you gotta hold that really close.
can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
there.
What you're seeing here is going to be good functionally, but visually it's going to change quite a bit. You're going to see things that you're looking at and say, I don't like the way that looks. For example, lines and distributions, you're used to seeing them horizontally displayed on the field. And that's not going to be square back here, but we are changing it. So what you see here, I want you to look at it more from a functional standpoint than a visual standpoint. So you're going to see some changes that make things look a lot better coming up. I had to give that caveat.
Yes, thank you, Kathy, for pointing that out. That is important information. So I wanted to start by showing you just, I'm logged in as a card holder. So this is what a card holder would see when they log in. These are transactions that this made-up version I'm responsible for. So if I wanted to process this transaction, I first get this screen with basic information. Because this came from the bank, these fields are locked down with information that came from the bank. And then these approval queues, and we'll have to talk a lot more about this in the future. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it today, but this is where the flexibility of the system comes in, so that if you're an agency that you want just a couple of people to touch a transaction, you can set it up that way. Or if you want, 3, 4 approvers in addition to the card holder and the supervisor, you can do that as well. And you can also manage, which of those people is able to touch different aspects of the transaction, adding a supplier, selecting purchase orders or contracts to associate with the transaction, applying the chart field coding, all all of that stuff is completely customizable. For the purposes of this demo, I'm gonna use this queue that's pretty simple. And, I have no idea what Delisle sells, so just call it test, but in that box is where the card holder would state what they've actually purchased, the good or service. And so this essentially replaces the need for a payment card log. Once those details are added, all that information populates into this summary section, and then the transaction starts to be built out. Now, in this PCA demo queue, as the card holder, I don't have access to select the supplier ID, nor do I have access to affect the line of distribution coding. So all I can really do is add files, add some notes if that would be necessary, and then either update or approve this transaction. If I update it, then the information is just going back to my list, and I can update it further in the future. If I approve it, then it's going on to my supervisor for their review and approval. So I'll add the file. And just to double click, adds the file, and then I approve the transaction, and I have to click on this little statement saying I certify that the transaction meets State of Ohio payment card guidelines. Save and submit. And now that's gone from my list. I've returned back to my work list. That transaction now has gone on to my supervisor.
So the file you added would be a receipt typically?
The question is, the file I added would be a receipt. Yes, it would be, you know, your invoice, your receipt, your packing slip, all those things that you're attaching in Oaks today on the back end of things after the voucher's created. In this world, the card holder would attach all those things before they ever submit the transaction. And so when the supervisor gets this, logs into the system and gets this transaction, all that backup is there. And I'll show you now how that works.
Jason, will the supervisor get an email notifying them if they have a transaction to approve?
Good question. The question was, will the supervisor get an email stating that they have a transaction to approve? And yes, they will get an email, and I'm trying to remember from my IT friends, you'll get one email per day with, you know, all of the transactions that are in your queue ready for approval. What we didn't want to do is inundate somebody with, you know, someone who supervises someone that has a lot of transactions. We don't want you to get email after email after email. You'll just get a summary each day.
If you don't, the email can go into the system and just check.
The question is, if you don't get an email, can you just go in and check? And yes, absolutely. You can log in whenever, and if you just go to that transactions button, it'll show you anything that's there waiting for you.
So if you have like your maintenance guy run to Lowe's fixing things up, and how long does it take for that to show up into Oaks, that transaction?
The question is, once someone goes out to the store and makes a purchase, how long does it take for that transaction to show up here? So today, if you go out and make a purchase today, that transaction is going to post at US Bank probably tomorrow, and we will load the transaction the following night. So today's Tuesday, the transaction would post at US Bank tomorrow. It would be loaded Thursday night and show up in Oaks on Friday. So this should show up at the same time. Not exactly the same time. I mean, it's going to load to Oaks overnight, and then it's going to load into the system the next morning. But we also, and I'll show you this later, there's also the capability within this system that if I go out to Lowe's and make a purchase, I can actually come into the system and key in the information and go ahead and attach my backup documentation. And provided that I've entered the information correctly enough to for the system to identify and match a bank transaction later, it'll just automatically merge it. And so, you can get the process started immediately. Whereas today, you're having to wait for that thing to show up in Oaks. There's a question from the webinar, the option to let the Pcard holder complete the fund code. Oh, I can't figure out how to, fund code info be able to happen. Yes, you can set this up so that anybody through the process can do any part of the processing that you want them to do. And when we do agency onboarding, we'll go through very specific instructions and help you get those initial queues set up. All right, so we're going to log in as my supervisor. And don't worry, I don't know her Oaks password. They just set the system up so that any password will work and test. So we go to transactions. And now that Delisle transaction that I approved is here waiting for her review. So she clicks on it, goes right past that initial screen because all that information's already been added. And so she can see here that I purchased from Delisle and my item or service description is here. In this queue, the supervisor also is not able to add a supplier or affect the line of distribution. But they do have this transaction history so they can see what I've done. They can review the invoice. Which of course popped up in the wrong place. For those on the webinar, you'll just have to take me at my word that there's an invoice being shown. And then if there were any notes, those show up here as well. Once the supervisor has conducted their review, then they have the option to either approve it, update it, or they could send it back. If they chose to send it back, then there's a place to give some notes for why it's being sent back. And as a supervisor, the only option is to send it back to the cardholder, but you'll see with later approvers, they'll have the option to send it back all the way back to the cardholder or to anybody in that approval process. This demo, we're just going to approve it. And we say and submit. And so now that's gone from the supervisor's queue and has moved on to the agency approver. While we're here, I want to point out that this transaction shows that it was merged. And so in this case, the cardholder made the purchase, came back, went ahead and keyed that transaction in. So they entered in, the merchant name, the date of the transaction, the amount of the transaction. And then when the bank file loaded, the system evaluated the keyed transactions and said, hey, this change companies for $335 matches this keyed transaction. We'll just put those together. And it goes ahead and adds the attachment that came from the keyed transaction to that bank transaction. And now the key transaction is gone and only the bank transaction still exists, but it shows as merged. If something gets merged in error, there is a process where you can go and unmerge it. But we've got this to the point that an erroneous merge should be very rare. The dollar amount has to match exactly. The date, I think, has to match exactly. And the merchant name has to match by 70%? 30. Okay, 30%. And that's to get away from, the UPS with 500 digits after it. We're trying to get to the point that the merchant name doesn't become a big obstacle to getting those auto merges. But we may have to toy with that a little bit to find the right percentage. For our testing, it's working pretty well. Okay, so I want to show you the next, approval
Yes, some questions.
process. Oh, questions? There's, hang on just a second, there's one from the webinar here.
I might have missed something. So does the card holder, supply like the contract ID or MVP or anything at the beginning?
The question is, does the card holder supply contract ID, anything like that? So actually applying it to the transaction would be based on the queue that you set up, whether you give the card holder the ability to do that or not. But let's just say you don't want them to actually add that information, but you do want them to tell you, like they would write it on the log today. If you just want them to give you the information, then you would use that notes section or direct the card holder to use that notes section to say, hey, for this purchase, I used this contract.
And then one more question about the supervisor. Does the agency have to set up, does the rules have to be the same? Meaning, one of my sites might want 4 people, but another site might only want 2 people. Is there flexibility for?
Yeah, the question is there flexibility in setting up those approval queues? And yes, absolutely. So, I can show you later, but I've set up like 18 different queues for my testing. And, you know, you could set up a queue for a specific prison in your case, or you could have a queue that's set up for all prisons and maybe a separate queue for central office or something like that. It's entirely flexible, customizable to whatever you need to meet your needs.
Can you have multiple people in that queue? Because if that supervisor's gone, then there's another supervisor, or I noticed there was a proxy drop down, there was some other kind of delegation drop down on there. Does that supervisor have to delegate someone as their backup?
So the question is, can you have multiple people at different approval levels?
Yeah, the same approval level, like the supervisor's approver or the employee, then you have the supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
That supervisor's not there, can somebody else go in and approve that document and keep the flow going?
So if the supervisor isn't there, can someone else go in to approve that? So there's 2 ways that we're handling supervisor, and you'll determine this at the queue level, but you can have the supervisor be the HCM supervisor. So in my case, that's Stacy Massey. If I swipe the card and the queue was set up to go to my HCM supervisor, then it would go to her. Or you can say, yeah, this person reports to a specific person, but that person is not who should be approving their payment card transactions. There's actually this other person, or maybe it's even a pool of other people who should approve their card transactions at the supervisor level. Then in the queue, you would set it up as, we call it, designate supervisor, and you can add as many supervisors into that pool as you want. And so when the card holder approves the transaction, it would route to all of those people. So each of those people would have it in their list, and then, you know, whoever approves it, it moves on. The same thing is true at the approval level. Let's just say that you use 3 additional approval levels. You could have 4 or 5 people in each of those levels. So, you know, you have max number of people to look at that transaction and keep it moving. Aaron, did you still have a question?
Yeah. On assigning the role, where you said you could say the cardholder can input the coding, right? You said you can make that a role. If you give them a role that allows them to input the coding, do they have to input the coding? Or could it be just available if they know it, but if they don't know it, it's okay?
The question is, if you give a card holder or a supervisor even the ability to add chart field coding or add supplier, do they have to do it, or is it just optional? So for every level, from card holder all the way through, everything is optional until what we call the final approver. And that final approver, they have to make sure that there's either a supplier ID or that they've selected supplier not found. That's just our way of kind of helping agencies to make sure that the supplier gets recorded, you know, if the merchant is a supplier. And then the 5 required Oaks chart fields must be completed, not necessarily accurate, but they must be completed for that thing to be final approved and sent, or eventually sent to Oaks. Damon, go ahead.
Jason, in the example of a cardholder, keying in their transaction, can they hit at that moment approve, like, for instance, if they would go on vacation and then their part is done, then it would merge after the fact?
Yes, and that's one of the nice things about the capability to key in transactions. You can actually run that keyed transaction all the way through the approval process, even to the final approver. And as long as it can match to a bank transaction when it comes in, nobody has to touch it again.
One question. The person that's making the changes as far as the security, I guess, you might call it, is that the payment card administrator only, or is it when you have?
The question is related to, application maintenance. So, you know, maintaining those queues, especially at the agency, who will do that? I would envision that in most agencies, that will probably be the payment card administrator, but that's really, something that we can set up completely independent of, you know, what we would consider payment card roles today. Anybody that the agency identifies that should do that, we can give them that access.
All right, second question. So you did mention that if it merges accidentally on merge, what if it doesn't merge and there's 2 transactions?
Yeah, I'm gonna show you that, functionality. There is the ability to force merge, a key transaction and a bank transaction. And I actually entered one where the dollar values were off slightly so that I can show that. A couple questions from the webinar. Some of our Pcard holders are division directors and do not need supervisor's approval. Is that approval function able to be bypassed? I'm not aware of any situation where someone shouldn't have some supervisor to approve their transaction. So we did not contemplate that for this. I would expect that there needs to be somebody who approves those at a supervisory level. If the transaction is in my queue for review as an approver, will I have the ability to correct what has been entered by the cardholder? Yeah, that's a good question. So everything is editable all the way until that final approver makes their approval. Once that approval is done, it's locked down so that we keep the information consistent with those. And then a comment about to correct a contract number. Yes, you can change those things. The beautiful thing about this is you can even change the supplier ID all the way up until that final approver touches it. So today in Oaks, you know, somebody has a supplier ID and we find out it's wrong. There's no way really to change that. With this system, you'll be able to change that supplier ID all the way up until that final approver makes their approval. Okay, so final.
What if the provider doesn't, what if the provider does not have a supplier ID? For example, we have a security software we buy from Europe once a year. It costs around $100. We do it on payment cards. It's a great product for what we want. They do not have a supplier ID in Oaks. I have to ask for an MTC portal every year for it. My question is, what about this company?
Great question and a great segue, because I'm going to show you that right now. So I'm logging in as, for this queue, it's the final approver. Now, if you chose to, you could have various levels of approval beyond this. So in our example transaction, the final approver has the same capabilities, you know, to see the history, or view the attached documents, review any notes, but then they also have this new button, search for edit supplier. So they click on that. Should have taken us up here. But we'll put in Delisle. And right away, these three buttons pop up, but it does take a minute for this, and this is using a call to call out to another table that's stored in our database and to review existing suppliers to look, try to find a match. In this case, it didn't find a match, but we have this button, supplier not found. So you would click that, and it applies this supplier name for all intents and purposes to say, we tried, but this supplier doesn't exist, so supplier not found. That's what we want to see on any transaction where the merchant isn't an Oaks supplier. Now, the approver also has the ability to affect the line of distribution information. And we're going to talk about this split line functionality later. But you can add multiple distributions if you need to. And then if you start to type in, a fund code, then it's going to give you a list. Maybe a better example is out of the account codes. If I type in 521, and it's going to give me, a list of the account code value. Well, not there. The list is actually up there. Let's see. There we go. So here's all the 521s. And so you select one. But we also have speed charts built into this. This isn't a great example, but it's the one that I have. When I use that speed chart, well, it didn't like that, probably because I already started to type some things in. Again, we're still testing the system. There we go. So it overwrote those fields with the information from that speed code, and then you just have to add the account code. But I do want to point out that because that account code isn't populated, the system is not going to allow me to approve this transaction. Now, once I enter an account code, now I can approve. Or I should be able to. So, still some bugs in the system, but.
Jesus. Those are missing. Is that complete, or are you still working on that?
No, okay, so this is another thing about the flexibility. You can, so the 5 Oaks required chart fields always have to be there. But as an agency, you can select additional chart fields that you use. And you do that at the queue level. So in this queue, we just added the agency use, and that's it.
So when you say at the queue level, so if you utilize your agency use, your reporting, and your grant number, will you have 3 squares there to utilize all 3?
Yes. You'll see for each chart field that you choose to use optionally as an agency for that particular queue, you'll see additional fields.
And when we run our BI reports, we'll be able to horn in on our grant number, for the grant number.
Yes, everything that now this is once we have our integration set up, but once that integration's done, everything that you populate here will populate into the tables and notes and then be available through BI.
Hey Jason, how are the speed charts being maintained? Is each agency doing that, or is it some sort of interface from Oak speed charts?
So speed chart maintenance is all based on what you've set up in Oaks. We're just pulling a query down of speed charts. I don't know, daily? Yeah, a daily query of speed charts. So, if you make a change right now, you're not going to have that information in this system this afternoon, but by tomorrow morning you would have it. Let's see, a couple more questions on the webinar. Could the supervisor approver also be the agency final approver? No,
One beyond the list.
yeah,
Yeah. Same person approve a transaction twice.
yes, we set it up so that the same person cannot approve a transaction twice. So it would have to be a different person. Can fields be added in the distribution line, for example, and we just talked about that. So yeah, when you set up your queue, you determine as an agency or even just for that queue, you know, which additional fields you want to see. And that was really just an effort to kind of present what you need and try to reduce clutter for the agencies.
Jason, am I thinking about this properly? Is the final approver the person today who does the reconciliation in Oaks?
Is the final approver the person who does the reconciliation in Oaks today? Yes. That's that person who's reviewing everything and saying, this information is good, it should go to Oaks.
Jason, try to do it to save that first. That's the problem.
Oh, yes, Kathy pointed out what I didn't do. You do have to save at the distribution level.
I'll have to work on that.
And now it will allow me to approve this. So now that's final approved, it's completely done as far as this system is concerned. Now just a word on getting the information into Oaks. An integration is currently being built that will take all of that information and send it over to Oaks in real time. But it's not done. As far as I know, it's not even close to done, but it is being worked on. So if an agency wants to use this system because of the workflows and everything, you know, once we're done with testing, we can accommodate that. And what we've done is to provide a report that you would be able to use that will show you, or you'd have to have someone who would go log into Oaks and basically type in the chart field information that you selected. But from this transaction history page, there's a report button. And that brings up this report that gives us, you know, all of the information that we just entered. So your fund code, your account code, department program, ALI, and then and you see all the fields show up here. But if you had those, we're using those optional fields, that information will populate here. So someone would have this, that they could go into Oaks and type that in. Obviously, we don't want to force anybody into that position, but if someone thinks that, you know, there's value in just the electronic workflow at this point, we built this to accommodate that. Okay, so,
I think you have a question.
oh, go ahead.
Are only the people that are in the approval line the ones who are able to see the transactions? Or is me as the payment card administrator, where I don't actually approve the transaction, will I be able to see what's still out there pending?
You would need to be in one of those approval levels. So you would probably want to be at the highest level within that group. It gives you access to it. You don't have to actually touch anything.
I don't have to be the final approver to see the transaction.
Right. You can have 15 people in that final approver level if you want. But you would just want yourself to be one of those people so that you can see everything, knowing that, you know, you're not actually going to touch it.
Jason, we're working on a transaction template screen that agency administrators will be able to access. They will be able to take action.
Okay, IT is telling me that they're actually working on an additional screen that would give Pcard administrators like a view-only capability. And that would provide a little more security, because if an internal control at your agency was that you don't want the Pcard administrator to be able to approve, but you do need to be able to see things, that's going to give you that ability to review information without, you know, being able to actually affect the transaction. Another question in the back here.
Sorry, I'm just gonna yell. So you just mentioned about history. So is there a way to see who edited which field? If a payment card holder put in, department one, one item in supplier and then somebody else changed it, we see who put what in which field?
We don't have field level history. We basically have action history. So you can see who approved it at what time, or who sent it back, or things like that. But actual field level, we don't have that. But I would say you don't have that in Oaks today either. Okay. So I'm going to go back in as a card holder and show you the key transaction functionality. So using Teresa's example, I just went out to Lowe's and made a purchase. So I come in here, I could just use today's date. I purchased $125.96 from Lowe's. And I'm actually going to use a different queue just to kind of show you the flexibility. So we'll just call it supplies. So that creates this transaction just like the bank transaction came in with this information already here.
So that queue is entered on every transaction, or is it something you set up up front?
The question is the queue selected for every transaction, or can it be defaulted? And you can default by card holder which queue they're in, so that you don't have to make that selection. But you can also not assign a default queue, and then, maybe that card holder services 2 or 3 different areas, and so they need to send their transactions down different paths. In this case, in this queue, the card holder has the ability to add a supplier. So they type in Lowe's. And Lowe's Home Centers. This red message is a bug that we just found and we'll be working out. But in this queue, the card holder also has the ability to affect these chart field codes, but I'm not going to do it to show that it is optional. Go ahead and save that as it is. And if I attempt to save this or approve it without a transaction, it's going to yell at me and tell me you have to attach at least one document. So I attach a document, certify it, and now I can save and submit it. And I just heard somebody say something about having to scan in documents. So another thing that we wanted to do with this app is to make it mobile friendly to the extent that we can. I was thinking specifically about our field staff, like, somebody at a DNR park, maybe they don't even use a computer ever, but they do have a payment card, but they've got an iPhone or whatever. So they would be able to snap a picture of that receipt with their phone and then go to the site on their phone and, find the receipt picture from the picture gallery and attach that right into the app. So, if you're in the office, yeah, you're probably going to scan things in, but you wouldn't have to.
Hey, Jason, how friendly is this thing for split coding?
The question was, how friendly is this for split coding? I'm going to show a little bit about that here in about 5 minutes. So that key transaction, I approved it. Now, because it's keyed, it still shows up in my transaction list. But it shows that I've approved it and it's not merged. So, but because I approved it, now it's moved on to my supervisor. She can review it and approve it, and then it would move on to the next person. And if it gets final approved, then it just sits there waiting for or it sits there and waits for a bank transaction, and if it auto merges, then it just moves on. Nobody ever has to touch it again. you know, let's say it comes in and it's actually shows up as $125.93, you know, I fat fingered the 96. It's not gonna auto merge, but I'll have the key transaction and then I'll see transaction for Lowe's for $125.93 on 8/27, and I know, that's the same thing, I just messed it up. And I'm actually gonna show you now how I would handle that. So I have this waste management for $78. Then I have this waste management WM Easy Pay. So it wasn't a 30% match in the merchant name, so it didn't auto merge them. But when I click on that key transaction, I can go in and edit it, or I can go to merge transaction, and it gives me a list of all the bank transactions that are available. I see this one that is that transaction. Say, yep, go ahead and merge it. And now it shows up as merged, and anything that I had done to that key transaction would be applied to the bank transaction now.
Which way is it merging? With the one you keyed, or is it taking the information from the transaction that came in and keeping that information?
So the question is, which way is it merging? So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a specific direction. The information from the bank transaction, the merchant name, the amount, the date, all that stuff is gonna remain whatever the bank has. That's what it needs to be. That's what we have in Oaks. But chart field coding that I added, maybe the supplier name if I added it, any attachments, those are all gonna come from that key transaction and attach themselves to that bank transaction. Hannah?
Are the merging and the keying functions also mobile friendly?
Are merging and
Right,
keying.
so you talked about taking a picture for like the receipt purposes, but can someone also key in chart fields and merge transactions from their phones?
Technically, yes, you would be able to do those things from a phone. Aesthetically, it might be a lot of, you know, doing back and forth and up and down to try to, because we aren't developing a mobile specific version of the page, but they are trying to develop the page as mobile friendly as possible. And then, you know, if this thing is just a really great hit, maybe at some point we would develop, you know, an app that you would get from the store, you know, whatever, I don't know, whatever you call it. Where you would download that app onto the phone and it would be fully mobile friendly. That's a ways off.
So Jason, when you say they merge, and if they merge, you say they merge, and if they merge, they go all the way. So, but they don't talk to Oaks. This does not talk to Oaks, right? So then the reconciler, the payers, they still have to do their thing in Oaks, but they have this instead of a paper payment card.
As the system exists today.
Right. So what do you mean when you say it goes, I mean, where does it go?
It would go to that point at which I went to the transaction history and you can get that report.
So then they just run the report and they see all that on the report, but then they need to go back into Oaks. And so are they printing this out, or are they having their two screens up and have Oaks here and then this other application here?
That's user discretion.
Right.
You know, you can print it if you need to.
To have that up to be able to see your Oaks, to do their Oaks stuff.
Correct. Yep. And I don't really envision that a lot of agencies are necessarily going to want to do that, but it's available. You know, maybe you're a small shop, you don't have a lot of transactions, and so it's not any great burden to do that, but it is nice to have the electronic workflow. We just wanted a way so that people can use it as soon as possible. And I think we're hoping that the full integration is ready first quarter of 2020 for sure. Becky, go ahead.
I thought it was supposed to batch, like batches, and we merged the Oaks in 2021.
So the question is about batching. I think when we first were talking about this app, it was going to be a batch job at night. But as we talked it over with the folks at Oaks, it just made sense to just do a real-time call Basically, as soon as that final approver approves it, it calls to Oaks and says, hey, here's this information, populates the fields. As long as everything is kosher, then it accepts it. And then, you know, everything Oaks is the same. It's gonna bill to a voucher overnight and all that. But we will have, once the integration's in place, real-time transmittal from the app over into Oaks.
That's what we're waiting until December or later on. That's
I'm hoping for January, but yeah. Yep. Go ahead.
I seem to remember at our last meeting, you said that the attachments won't migrate to Oaks. Is that still accurate, that attachments will be in the actual app?
That's correct. The attachments will be in the app, but for the purpose of attachments, this app will be the system of record for those attachments.
And if we adopt early, there's no need to move those attachments over, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Can you say that again for me? What he just said?
Yeah. So this app will be the system of record for attachments.
Okay.
And my staff are gonna have to bounce back and forth between this system and Oaks until we get everybody onboarded. But if an agency's onboarded to the app, then we'll do our audits from the app. So effectively trying to eliminate the need to go to Oaks for purposes of payment card. We'll have to have one person, probably the payment card administrator, at each agency who still has access to Oaks, so that if this thing has, you know, some fatal error, we're still able to conduct business. Janet?
Will the state auditor also have access to this application, the audit agency?
Will the state auditor have access? And yes, we'll make sure that we have like an audit capability that would be shared by OBM staff and also the state auditor's office. A couple questions from the webinar. Will there be an option to mark the transaction as MBE? Yeah, so MBE, we're still fighting with how to make that work because, you know, if you assign a contract to the transaction and the MBE flag is controlled by that contract. But there's also cases where maybe you select a supplier, but you don't have a contract and a transaction may or may not be MBE eligible and you need to be able to select that. So IT is working on making that functionality available. Our attachments carried over to Oaks, we talked about that. Okay, so I just showed merge functionality. Okay, split transactions. So I have this Walmart that I want to show. So somebody went out to Walmart, as we know, Walmart sells a variety of different things that would be reportable under various different account codes. And we have an agency that uses purchase orders with Walmart because they need, you know, more than $50,000 a year, so they have POs with the purchase board for that purpose. So if I go into the transaction, and bear with me because we have limited data in this test system, so I'm actually going to use a supplier that is not Walmart. I need to in order to show you how this can work. So this supplier, and we'll just pretend it's Walmart, has I think a couple different POs here, and each of the POs has various lines on it. So I'm going to pick two lines from the first PO, and notice as soon as I pick a second line, now it's popping up and asking me for some more information. And it's asking me for either the amount or the percentage that I want to assign to this line of the PO. I'm going to go ahead and select something off of this second PO too. So I'm going to say that 33% of this goes to that line. Another 33% goes to the second line, and then this other PO is going to pay for 34%. I add those PO lines. system thinks about it, and then it creates 3 separate lines, we call it here. So here's the second line with its distributions. And the third line. So it's lines within this transaction in this system, but when this information is sent to Oaks, it's actually, Oaks will create 3 separate transactions on the table so that these various PO lines and POs can be assigned. Because within Oaks, one transaction can only get 1 PO line. So we have to split the transaction in order to make that happen.
Okay, Jason, a follow-up from the question, what if it doesn't have a PO? What if it's just a $500 item that I would like to split across a couple of grants? Because both grants would be using it, personally.
So for those grants, you should be able to just split it by distribution, right?
I need to do that now.
Yeah. So you can just add a distribution line.
Okay, I can add distribution lines, that's what thank you very much.
Yep. So, we have built into the app right now the ability to manually split these transactions. But I want to know from you, is there any need to split it? Does anybody use split transaction functionality in Oaks today outside of this whole PO thing?
Yeah.
You're actually splitting it into separate transactions in Oaks. For what purpose?
Transactions or coding lines. Coding lines.
But you're just splitting the distributions, right? Yeah. No.
Okay.
So split distribution you can do within a transaction, but there's a functionality where you select the transaction line and you click on this split transaction link, and it says, okay, this is a $100 transaction. How many transactions do you want to split it into, and how much are each of those? Shawkai, you're using that?
Yes, we have to use that for Amazon, when we have different supplier IDs.
All right, nobody's allowed to purchase from Amazon.
Wow.
Can you just make it separate purchases? Order in place, I mean,
We're still buying from Amazon, I say.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Thank you for bringing it up. It's one that I forgot about. I don't know how I could forget that disaster. We'll take that under advisement and see what we can do with it.
Jason, I got a quick question. When you pull that PO, the supplier, when you pull the PO by the supplier, does that show all the POs at that agency for that specific supplier?
Yes.
Jason, POs with available money are the last.
Okay. Yes, POs with an available balance and they're amount based. If you have a quantity based PO, you can't use it with Pcard. We're not going to show it to you.
Do the POs, if I'm not mistaken, when you first gave the ability to use a PO with a Pcard, it had to be like a dedicated PO just for Pcard. You're saying that's not a thing anymore, and you can just create a PO, but it has to be an amount PO.
Yeah, and you've always been able to do that.
Oh, okay.
I was learning at the same time you were, so you can create a PO that can only be used for a specific Pcard. But why would anybody ever do that? I mean, you can just create a PO that can be used for anything as long as it's amount based. You can use it for a Pcard. So that's what we recommend people do.
Okay.
Okay, question from the webinar. If you don't distribute the cost here, will the voucher still be created but require distribution there? So we're requiring that you enter at least one distribution line in the app. You cannot approve this thing final and send it to Oaks without at least one distribution line. And that's going to clean up a lot of the budget errors that we see. we have at least one agency that, for whatever reason, they go in and just approve the transaction with nothing on it, and immediately it goes into budget error because the account code is still 5400001. We're not gonna allow you to do that anymore. So you'll have to at least apply one line of chart field coding. Okay, the last thing I wanted to show is hold functionality. So today, we put things in dispute for various different reasons, doesn't necessarily mean that we're disputing it. Let's say GBEX is probably a good example. So they've charged my card for $12, but they only sent me $4 worth of stuff. I can go down here and say hold transaction, and then select merchandise not received. And now that's just sitting there, and everybody knows, everybody that looks at this knows, oh, this thing's been sitting out here for 2 weeks and nobody's moved it because the merchandise hasn't been received. We have a couple other options here. Unknown transaction or fraud, and then dispute. And if agencies have other reasons that you would hold things that we need to add to this list, I'm sure that list can be amended as necessary.
So once this app interfaces to Oaks, will the dispute automatically appear in Oaks?
Once this integrates to Oaks, will the dispute automatically appear in Oaks? So we're not going to send the transaction until it's completely ready to go. So there's really no reason to report disputes in Oaks.
That answers my question.
Okay. And then,
Jason, I think everything was great. I just wanted, one of the things that happens more often than not is vendor charges tax. So now what happens when we agree that we owe everything but the tax? I'm not quite sure I picked up what happens here at that point in time.
so, we can add a selection here for sales tax charged would be a hold reason. And
Well, then I guess my question is, then does that sit there until we get a credit, or?
Yeah, it's gonna sit there, and that was the next thing I was gonna show is,
Okay.
how do you clear this hold? So let's just say, it's a few days later, I got the other $8 worth of stuff I was waiting on, so I come in here and I just uncheck this box, and now I can push it on. A word on sales tax. I just wanna make sure everybody knows that U.S. Bank will not support us in sales tax disputes. They don't get in the middle of that. As far as they're concerned, sales tax is just an evil of this world that we have to deal with. And so if we submit a dispute to U.S. Bank for sales tax, they're gonna say, sorry about your luck, work it out with the merchant.
New RFP.
No, the new RFP can't handle that one. Okay, so I think I may have covered my other slides here, but switch this over for the webinar folks. Okay, so we talked about split transactions and the reasons, and the only reason to split besides purchase orders, and contracts would be the same way as purchase orders. If you had two different contracts associated with a single transaction, you would also be able to select multiple contracts and, apply the amounts or percentages. But the only other reason for a split that was brought up is Amazon, and we'll talk about that, see if we can figure something out. What I really don't want to do is have that manual split functionality because it's kind of ugly. I'd like to keep it as simple as possible. We talked about hold transactions. One thing we didn't discuss yet is simultaneous approval. So, we talked about how transactions, you could have multiple supervisors who could get a transaction in their list at the same time, multiple approvers. And we have an issue with the way the system's built right now that, let's just say, I'm an approver and so is Ron. And, our workspaces are at opposite ends of the building, and we both go into the list while a transaction is waiting on our approval level. If I pick it and then 2 minutes later Ron picks it, I'm gonna make changes to it and approve it. Then Ron's gonna make changes to it and approve it. His changes are gonna stick. Is that right, Stephen? No, it's worse than that. We don't even know for sure whose changes are gonna stick. The question is, do you think that it's likely that scenario would play itself out? Seeing some no's.
It could, but so what? UJV caps it.
Yeah, okay. So I think for now, we're gonna leave it as designed, but if it does become a problem, it's more of a heavy lift for our developers, but there is a way that they could, once you select it, then it's locked out. It'd be quite a bit more development, so if we don't have to do it, we'd rather not. So we'll see how it goes.
So if we have 10 people in the approval role, are all 10 going to get an email?
I believe so. Yes, I'm seeing some head shake from IT, so yes, all 10 will get that one summary email for the day.
Okay, well, I think we'll have to consider that in that scenario then too. Everybody needs to know who's on. Just because you've been told doesn't mean you need to touch it.
Right. A couple things from the webinar. Once a transaction is vouchered and paid, does the Oaks voucher show up somewhere in the records on this database? Good question. Yes. There will be a daily query, I think, that will bring the voucher IDs back and show those in the app. We get out of state sales tax also. Comment on sales tax. Okay. Any other questions or concerns related to the app or anything else, Pcard?
Hey, Jason, the queuing part, if, we have a centralized purchasing department that services 4 fiscal sections. Will they see only the queuing opportunities we want them to, or will they see all the queuing opportunities the whole agency has?
They'll see it however you set them up. So now you'll have to assign them at the staff level. But yeah, if you want them to see, one queue but not 5 others, you just set it up that way.
Actually, let me clarify that. So they would see all of them. But you could set a default for one of them to queue. So if that's an issue, then we need to address it. But that drop-down list that you saw, that Jason had all those in there, if you had that many for your agency, they would see them all.
But only for a queue that they're assigned.
Well, if they're assigned to a queue, then it's just going to default to that, and they don't even have to touch it.
So they can't change it?
They can't, because we wanted to make this very flexible. So if somebody needed to route it another direction, they'd have the ability to do that.
Follow-up question on purchase orders. We don't use them a whole lot, but I think currently a purchase order you want to use for payment card is only allowed to have one line. It looked like you had multiple lines on those.
No, you can have multiple lines. The issue is that in Oaks, for a transaction, you can only assign one PO line. So if you had that transaction and you needed to assign multiple lines, you'd have to split the transaction. And that's basically what we're doing in an automated fashion through this.
Jason, this is down the road, but when you interface with folks, I just wanted to see a way to bring back the vendor threshold information at the point in time when the card holder is
maybe just thinking about it, okay, that might be a lot. And then this doesn't change covert cards in any way. We have a couple covert cards.
No, it shouldn't change anything. I mean, I assume you'd want to set up a specific queue for that and probably assign that queue to those card holders.
And will a real bank dispute be something that you can take off of this eventually? Not be on hold, but like we really want a true dispute with the bank intervention?
So you can put it in that dispute status. You would still have to complete the form, the bank's form, and submit it to them. Aaron?
Are all agencies gonna be required to use this new app?
Are all agencies going to be required to use this app? In the first part of 2020, no. But it's my hope that agencies would look at this and see value in it and want to use it. But eventually, we want this to be the enterprise tool for Pcard. And so, you know, if a year from now, somebody has to come along kicking and screaming, as long as I get support from my superiors, that's the direction we're going.
When will this be available to start? Beginning January, you said?
When will it be available to start? So we're in system test. I expect we've got another few to several weeks of system tests. Once that's complete, we'll do UAT. I'd like to have, 3 or 4 agencies that want to come in and test this thing end to end and make sure it's running the way we want it to. From that point, we volunteered OBM Fiscal to test it live for a period of time. Once we know that it's running well, then we'll be ready to open it up to additional agencies. So I'm thinking, we may have our interface by the time we're to that point. But as soon as we can get it ready, we just don't want to rush this thing out the door and it has a lot of bugs and people get frustrated with it. I want us to really run this thing through a hard test and make sure it's operating well before we expose it to other agencies.
Will there be a recorded demo or slide deck or something that we can share internally for feedback?
Yeah, so our new version of this GoToWebinar automatically records, so this whole thing is recorded. And we'll have to put it out on the webpage, because it's too big to send, but we'll get it out there this week. Any other questions?
Is there still design of it integrating with the e-procurement?
Is there thought of integrating this with e-procurement? We looked at that through the design phase of ePro, and while it was possible, we just didn't see enough value in integrating for it to be worth the lift that it would take. Basically, we thought we might be able to eliminate the supervisor approval in this system. All the other approvals were still going to have to happen, so it just wasn't worth the effort to try to fully integrate. But we'll keep an eye on different aspects of the procurement process over time and see if there are opportunities that we should investigate further. Damon?
Yeah, Jason, this is off the topic of the app, but we were exploring possibly lowering the number of our cards. We wondered if anyone in the room or yourself might have suggestions how you know when someone truly needs it versus.
I run the Pcard report and see the volume, check the volume, how often they use it.
Some type of justification or something before they ask for,
Damon, I'm not sure if you heard Becky's answer, but she said she runs reports to see their volume of use. So, if they're an infrequent user, then maybe it can be eliminated.
Yeah, I just didn't, does anyone have anything that they do prior to opening a card?
Are you saying people at your agency want cards? They're mine, and most people don't want them.
That's pretty debatable.
I mean, for us, our deputy directors of each department are required to submit justification to our senior staff before we'll issue something. And that's because, I mean, our director's very leery about Pcard,
Yeah.
so.
All right, thank you all.
Yep, and there are two more app-related questions from the webinar. The first one is there a cost for the use of this application? And I would say no additional cost. You know, you pay OBM and DAS through various means, and this is covered in those. And then how will this work if employees do not have access to Oaks because they work out in the field? So you don't need to have access to Oaks. If you're a field employee, you would just go to this site, which is just a URL from the internet. No Oaks access is necessary. Now, you know, maybe that person doesn't know their user ID and password, but I think every employee at least has a user ID, and we may have to work on the password situation, but we can certainly help with getting that set up. All right, any other questions? Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for attending today, and if you have feedback, send it my way. Thank you.